A few weeks ago, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and American President Joe Biden announced a roadmap for a renewed Canada-U.S. partnership. Now, it's been hailed as a very good agreement, but Professor Monica Gattinger from the University of Ottawa, in a recent op-ed, noted that there are sectors of the energy economy that were ignored. So we're going to talk to her about that. Welcome to the interview, Monica.
Thanks, Markham.
Now, hydrogen, oil and gas, carbon capture and utilization, there's a number of areas that are very prominent in energy discussions these days that didn't find their way into the agreement. Give us an overview of your argument, if you will, please.
Yeah, no, sure, I'd be happy to. So I think, it's important to start with, there's some great news here. It is great news that Canada-U.S. collaboration on energy and climate issues is back. This roadmap is terrific news in terms of, laying out an ambitious set of commitments around a whole host of issues, including issues around climate and energy. In reading the roadmap, though, as somebody who's been, a little bit in the issues on energy and climate for some years now, and certainly somebody who's interested in Canada-U.S., I was a bit surprised not to see specific mention of certain aspects of energy. Notably, CCUS wasn't specifically mentioned, hydrogen wasn't specifically mentioned, SMRs weren't specifically mentioned, energy security got a passing mention, and all we got for oil and gas, at least sort of explicitly, was methane management. So that seemed like a pretty big list, increasing list of things that weren't finding their way explicitly into the roadmap. Doesn't mean they can't be addressed. I think there are ways to broaden the agenda, but I was surprised not to see them mentioned explicitly.
Well, are you anticipating, or do you think the government should do separate agreements down the road on these issues?
Well, I think there's lots of room to build them into the agenda. It's important to recall that when it comes to bilateral relationships, those agreements that quote unquote at the top between the Prime Minister and the President are really important, because that gives the mandate for folks at the working level, the officials on either side of the border, to they've got their marching orders in terms of things they need to work on. So there's lots of opportunity there. There's a high-level dialogue between Minister Wilkinson and Climate Envoy John Kerry. There's going to be a renewed memorandum of understanding between Natural Resources Canada and the Department of Energy. I think there's lots of opportunity to build these into the existing agenda. I think that would be the better route to go, rather than to have separate tracks for those issues.
Now, I interviewed a representative from the Canadian Mining Association last week about meetings that were taking place in Washington around Canadian supply of critical metals and minerals for EV batteries, because the Americans are building out their supply chains for batteries. So they're very interested in integrating Canada into those supply chains. And it seems to me that what is true on the mining side is also true on hydrogen and CCUS and other things. So might we see these further work be done to flesh out the agreement, given, the Americans clearly are interested in Canada?
Yeah, no, there's no question. And the meetings that you just referred to, again, that was something that was specifically mentioned in the roadmap, was collaboration around battery and storage technologies and critical minerals and the like, which is, again, that provides an agenda for the folks at the working level to collaborate on these issues. I think there's lots of room to build out for precisely the sorts of things that you mentioned. Take CCUS. As a concrete example, both Canada and the United States are large oil and gas producers. The U.S. is the largest oil and gas producer in the world. Canada ranks up there very highly as well. So these are going to be keystone technologies for both countries, but it's not only for oil and gas development, it's also for things like the development of the hydrogen sector, right? So for the development of a blue hydrogen economy, you're going to need that CCUS technology in the natural gas sector. And increasingly, we're seeing as well that CCUS is going to be extremely important for other hard to abate sectors like heavy industry. So take cement, take steel, take chemicals manufacturing. Again, lots of opportunity for both countries to look at these as strategic technologies that they can collaborate on between now and 2050 to get them developed and deployed and make the most use of them to reduce emissions.
Yeah, given the emphasis in this agreement on climate change and the need to reduce emissions, the finger points squarely at the Alberta oil sands, which make up 11% of Canada's national emissions, and which President Biden has already flagged with his cancellation of this Keystone XL pipeline. He canceled it because he thinks that bitumen and heavy crude oil from Alberta is too emissions intensive. And I wonder if maybe it was deliberately left out of the agreement because it's such a political flashpoint in Canada and really in the US as well.
Well, I think that's a really interesting comment, Markham. Now, that said, it's not just issues around oil and gas that sort of got a pass. So did hydrogen. So did nuclear. I mean, both countries and even the Biden campaign mentioned small modular reactors in the energy and climate platform. So to not see those issues in there as well. So I think I would actually take a kind of a broader look and say there are certain technologies that maybe, aren't either the sexiest technologies or perhaps are, technologies that risk being politically controversial. And so as a result of that, maybe we haven't seen explicit mention of them. That said, I think it's going to be really important. There are tremendous opportunities for the two countries to work together. We're, as we know, Markham, on reducing emissions, it's going to take an all of the above approach. This is not, just a few technologies. This is a whole suite of technologies and identifying how to deploy them, developing them and deploying them. So there's lots of room here for, for that collaboration. And perhaps if you're right that there were some political reasons that they didn't include some of these things explicitly, but I would like to think as we move forward, there's going to be a way of broadening that agenda to ensure that we're finding those areas to collaborate to mutual benefit.
Well, let's talk about, this will be my final question, Monica, but let's talk about Biden's intent, because I've read his climate plan when he was during his presidential campaign, and was very clear. He said, under the Trump administration, the US had lost its leadership around clean energy and clean technology, and he pledged that by 2030, the US would be #1 in the world again. And it seems to me that if the US, and he's going to pour $2 trillion into his climate plan. So it seems to me that if they, given the proximity and the historic trading relationship between Canada and the US, that is a huge opportunity for Canada, and something I think clearly the federal government is lining up Canada to participate and be included in Biden's plans.
Oh, there are massive opportunities across the entire energy sector. So, I mean, we've been talking a little bit about hydrogen, about CCUS, about oil and gas, about heavy industry, but there's also, of course, in the electricity sector, right? I mean, we have one of the cleanest electricity grids in the world, and the US is going to need a tremendous amount of renewable energy, low emissions energy, no emitting energy coming onto their grid. I think there's some tremendous opportunities for Canadian electricity producers to be selling into the United States. But I think it takes, looking at where there are opportunities to collaborate around emissions reductions. To my mind, that's one of the key things here, is that we've got not only, the Biden administration recommitting to Paris, but also committing to net zero by 2050. That's a huge, area where you've got both governments who are looking at, this longer term pathway. And that opens up a lot of opportunities, I think, to look at where are some of the short-term areas where we can collaborate, but also where are some of the longer-term areas, technologies that might not be available today, but will be over time.
Monica, very insightful. Thank you very much for this.
You're very welcome, Markham.